There is a land where blood was once spilled to feed something that didn't belong to this world. A place where every step taken awakens a buried curse. People call it the karma of dark sorcery, a path with no way back. And tonight, you'll understand why some things should never be unearthed. Twilight had just settled when the old, rusty bus came to a stop along the red dirt road. Tuấn stepped off, pulling his suitcase behind him, eyes scanning the wild grasses and winds of the mountain village. It was his first time returning to Vinh though, the village where his grandfather had once lived, and the very place his mother had strictly forbidden him to ever mention. The piece of land behind the mountain, his grandfather's only legacy, was the sole reason he left the city. As an architect, Tuấn believed this place could become a valuable eco-resort. But from his very first step, everything was unlike what he had imagined. Along the narrow dirt path blanketed with dust, an old woman appeared, as if she had stepped right out of the darkness. Her white hair was thin and dry, her eyes sunken like stone hollows, her back hunched, yet her voice was clear and precise. "You're Mr. Tu's grandson, aren't you?" Tuấn nodded. Before he could say a word, the old woman continued, "Don't touch the land behind the mountain. That's where they buried those who practiced dark sorcery. The blood, it hasn't even dried." A chill ran down his spine, but he forced a polite smile. "Thank you, ma'am, but I think you might be mistaken." The old woman said nothing more. She turned away, slowly stepping toward the ancient banyan tree. The small bells hanging from her cane jingled faintly, like muffled cries from the other side. Mr. Tu's house sat alone on the hillside, the wood decayed, the tiled roof discolored and stained. Tuấn opened the door. A wave of damp, moldy air rose up, a mixture of wet earth and scorched ash. In the main room, his grandfather's photo still hung on the wall, stern-faced, eyes seemingly following his every move. The altar was covered in dust, but oddly, the incense sticks were still glowing red, as if someone had just lit them. He walked around to the back, where a wooden wall had been almost entirely eaten away by termites. With a gentle push, a small hidden room suddenly revealed itself. Inside was another altar. No incense, no portrait, only a black wooden box sat neatly in the center, the surface carved with sharp claw marks and serpent eyes. An old talisman clung to the lid, the writing nearly faded, just 2 lines left, like dried streaks of blood. Before Tuấn could even touch it, a freezing chill surged down his spine. He quickly shut the door and stepped out, heart pounding for no reason he could explain. That night, he stayed in the old wooden house. The wind howled in from the forest, slipping through the cracks, cold enough to make his skin crawl. Leaves rustled, something like footsteps, then silence. Tuấn turned in bed. He dreamed. In his dream, he stood in the middle of a forest under a red moon. A woman appeared, dressed in a torn red dye, long hair hiding her face. She held a small black bundle, dripping blood. Step by step, she walked toward him. Blood dripped to the ground, and from those drops, tree roots rose, twisting around her feet, as if fed by it. Terrified, Tuấn tried to run, but the woman lifted her face. She had no eyes, only 2 hollow black sockets. She whispered in a rasping voice, "You opened my ground, then you shall raise it in my place." He woke with a jolt, drenched in sweat, but when he stood and turned on the light, what made him freeze were 3 small bloody handprints, smeared on the bathroom mirror. They weren't his. There were no cuts on him. But the blood was real. Cold blood. The next morning, Tuấn went to the village market for a few supplies. A fish seller glanced at him and asked, "You staying at Mr. Tu's house?" He nodded. She gave a sad smile. "Last night, did you hear someone singing a lullaby?" Tuấn stiffened. "I was alone. Who would be singing?" The woman didn't answer. She quietly turned away. Even though the sun was blazing, Tuấn felt a sudden chill. When he got back, he walked the garden's edge. In the farthest corner, where an ancient banyan tree grew with roots rising above the ground like fingers reaching out, he found a small stone slab, nearly hidden by dirt and moss. Carved into the stone, in uneven handwriting, were the words, Whoever digs this soil shall bleed for 3 generations. The letters were old, but clear. A breeze passed. The bells in the banyan tree jingled faintly. Tuan turned. No one there. But in that stillness, he felt it. Someone watching. Not from afar, but very close. Right behind him. That afternoon, rain suddenly poured down despite the blazing sun. Tuan stood under the eaves, watching sheets of white rain fall on the overgrown garden behind the house. The sound of rain mixed with the faint jingle of the bells from the old banyan tree brought back memories of the strange old woman from yesterday. A strange feeling welled up inside him, like something was stirring within the house. Quietly, ominously, he remembered the hidden room behind the wooden wall, where the strange black box lay. He had closed it that day, but never opened it. Though the fear still lingered, curiosity pushed him to return. Grabbing a flashlight, Tuan stepped quietly into the small room. The weak ceiling bulb barely lit anything. The musty, moldy scent seemed even heavier now. The box was still there. He approached, hand trembling as he peeled off the torn talisman on the lid. At that moment, a wave of icy air hit his face. There was no wind, no one else was there. But the box trembled slightly, as if it were breathing. Tuan stepped back, sweat pooled in his palms. He was about to shut the door when it swung open on its own. The old hinges groaning like a throat being strangled. Inside the box was nothing but a yellowed piece of paper. He opened it. The handwriting was jagged and crooked. On the full moon night, do not face the banyan tree. If you hear a lullaby, under no circumstances should you respond. Tuan's heart pounded. The warning was too specific, too clear. He couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, the rain returned. Tuan sat inside, the lights flickering from a faulty circuit. The clock struck midnight. Just as he was about to go to bed, a lullaby drifted in from the direction of the banyan tree. An ancient tune, a woman's voice, choked with emotion, each word slicing through the darkness. Hush now, sleep tight, mother's blood is still here. Hush now. The lullaby echoed in his ears as if it were lulling him to sleep. But he didn't look toward the door. He remembered the warning. He pressed his hands to his ears and shut his eyes. But the lullaby grew closer and closer, until it was whispering right by his ear. Suddenly, 3 knocks at the door. Soft, slow, cold. There was no one else here. Only a few houses remained in the village, and no one knew he had come back. Tuan stood, slowly walked to the door. He peeked through the crack. Outside, no one. But the moment he turned around, the living room door slammed shut behind him. Darkness. The lights were out completely. He quickly turned on his flashlight. The beam scanned across the walls. He froze. Wet footprints, small ones, like a child's, tracked across the floor, leading from the door straight to the box. And the box was open. Inside, there was something new. A piece of red cloth, soaking wet, ice cold. When he brought it close, words slowly emerged through the moisture. The first has died. The second is blood of blood. Tuan dropped the cloth. He could feel someone standing right behind him. He turned, no one. But then, a cold breath brushed the back of his neck. And a woman's voice, soft, near, whispered, "You are the child of the charm? There's no escape." Tuan screamed, turned on his phone's flashlight, and ran out into the rain. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the village, to the house of Mr. Try. His grandfather's old friend, once a spiritual healer. When he opened the door, Mr. Try looked at him, said nothing, and simply sighed before leading him inside. Sitting by the fire, Tuan told him everything. After a long silence, Mr. Try finally spoke. "Mr. Tu, your grandfather was once the best herbalist in this region. But he was also the first to touch what should never have been touched: blood charms and living sorcery. He buried a young woman alive beneath the banyan tree, to raise a charm and ask for a child. When he finally had your mother, he thought it was over. But charms bring karma, and karma must be carried by someone. And it chose you, because you opened the box that was meant to stay buried forever." Tuan sat in silence, his body trembling, not from the cold, but from a fear just beginning. A fear not yet fully formed, but growing like roots, sprouting from within his blood. That night, Tuấn couldn't sleep. The entire house seemed to shrink into itself, swallowed by the sound of rain and the faint jingle of bells from outside. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear the lullaby again, and the laughter of children drifting from the banyan tree, and the unmistakable feeling that someone was watching him through the crack in the bedroom door. The next morning, the rain had just stopped. A thick fog blanketed the land behind the house. Tuấn stepped onto the porch. His eyes darkened from a sleepless night. But he didn't leave. Something inside him wouldn't allow it, no longer curiosity, but rather, a thread, invisible yet unbreakable, tethering him to this house. He returned to the old room where the wooden box had been kept. Inside, alongside the red cloth from the previous night, there was something new, an old notebook, leather-bound, cracked with age, its corners stained with what looked like long-dried blood. Tuấn opened it. The very first line made his breath catch. If you are reading this, then the blood has already begun to feed the charm again. The handwriting was his grandfather's, Mr. 2. Back then, I was poor, infertile, shamed by the entire family. I met a Khmer man across the border who taught me how to raise a charm with human blood, to ask for a child. At first, I refused. Then I gave in. I chose a mute girl from the village, orphaned, nameless, forgotten. I gave her food, shelter. But when the charm matured, I buried her alive beneath the banyan tree, along with her hair, fingernails, and first blood. Tuân's hand trembled as he turned the page. The ink had blurred, but the words still felt hot, as if freshly written. 3 months later, my wife became pregnant. That was your mother. I thought the charm was satisfied. But with every full moon, I heard the voices again, first lullabies, then cries. I was scared, but I never spoke of it. I buried the charm box beneath this house. I sealed it with a talisman, locked it away, and never went near it again. Tuấn paused. A wave of revulsion, sorrow, and confusion surged inside him, his heart threatening to shatter from the weight of it all. The final page read, I know someone will eventually open the box. The charm isn't dead. My blood hasn't paid its full debt. My child, my grandchild, will carry the rest. If you want it to end, you must find her remains. You must undo it with original blood. If not, the charm will grow. It is already rising in the soil. Tuấn closed the journal. His hands were shaking. The truth was cruel. He had been born from a dark ritual. His mother, the quiet, withdrawn woman he knew, was the result of a blood-stained curse. And he was the heir to it all. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The window burst open. Winds howled through the gaps in the wooden walls. And in that wind, he heard a whisper. You've read it, haven't you? Your blood is mine? Tuấn spun around, no one there. But the wooden box now had a long crack along its side. From within, a single drop of fresh blood had fallen to the floor. Panicked, he fled the house. His feet carried him straight to the home of the old woman by the banyan tree, the one who had warned him on the very first day. She wasn't surprised to see him. She looked into his eyes, then gently nodded. You opened the box. You read the confession. That means, the charm has begun to live again. Tuấn sank down, his gaze blank. I don't want anyone else to die. How do I end this? She sighed, her voice like wind rustling through dry leaves. Charms don't kill. The one who raises the charm causes death. If you want to stop it, you must find the grave of the one who was buried alive. You must know her real name. You must call her name, and return her blood. Tuấn looked up. But, I don't know her name. The old woman was silent for a long while. Then, quietly, she went into her house and returned with an old handkerchief. A name was stitched into it with black thread. She placed it in his hand. That girl was my sister. Her name was Ngọc Anh. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered, an ominous sign. Tuấn gripped the handkerchief in his pocket, the one embroidered with the name Ngọc Anh. His heart tangled in a storm of fear and guilt. Each step he took toward the banyan tree behind the house felt like descending deeper into a dream with no way out. But this time, he wasn't alone. The old woman, the keeper of secrets for decades, walked beside him. Her back hunched, one hand clutching a string of bells that jingled softly with each step, as if to remind the earth that she was coming back to atone. They stopped before the ancient banyan tree, its roots buried beneath wild grass untouched by human feet. She pointed to a slight dip in the earth, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. "She's here. That year, it was me and Mr. Tu who buried her." Tuan swallowed hard, hands shaking around the shovel. The old woman simply laid a bony hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, but her eyes, wet with tears, silently begged forgiveness from someone waiting below. Tuan began to dig. The soil was like stone. Even after the rain, each strike of the shovel echoed with something else. A distant bell, ringing deep underground, about half a meter down. His shovel struck something soft, like soaked fabric. He froze. Then, rising slowly from the mud, was a pale white hand, slender fingers. Nails intact, not decayed, no smell, cold as if buried only days ago. Tuan fell back in shock, but the old woman didn't flinch. She knelt down and whispered. Her voice choked. "Ngọc Anh, I've come back for you." A wind kicked up, dead leaves swirling into the air. The bells in her hand rang furiously. The banyan groaned, its trunk letting out a sound like cracking bones. Tuan stared in horror as thick black blood oozed from the soil beneath his feet. Not rainwater. Blood. Heavy. Dark. Metallic. The old woman turned to him, signaling for the handkerchief. Tuan handed it over. She placed it into the grave and began to chant, a series of ancient Khmer verses, foreign to Tuan's ears. But within each word, he could feel pleading, remorse, and a sorrow, deep as the grave itself. Then, the hand twitched, and from the heavy silence came a trembling voice, soft, girlish. "I'm so cold. Did you bring the sun?" Tuan froze. His heart stopped for seconds. He couldn't believe it, but the voice came again. "I've waited, ever since the day I was buried. No one's called my name again." The old woman broke into tears. Her frail shoulders shook. Tuan fell to his knees, paralyzed by panic, pity, and grief, all crashing into one. Then, for the first time, he spoke the name of the girl to whom his blood owed everything. "Ngọc Anh, I'm sorry." In that moment, the banyan flared red, a flash of eerie crimson light pulsing from its trunk, then vanishing as quickly as it came. The lullaby returned, distant at first, then closer and closer, until it became laughter, children's laughter, sharp, echoing, unreal. The old woman lifted her face, her hollow eyes glistening. Her soul has awakened, but not yet at peace. There's still one last thing left unpaid. Tuan stared in confusion. What else? Her voice trembled like wind through dry leaves. Her body isn't whole. Someone took her heart, used it to feed the charm. If it's not found, the charm will birth a new form, and it will wear your blood's face. Tuan felt the earth beneath him shift. From the grave, the dirt began to rise, slowly forming a small mound. Inside, strands of black hair, wet, fresh, and an eye, a real eye, wide open, staring straight at him, unblinking. The laughter of a child echoed once more, then faded into the sound of bells, and vanished, as if it had never been there at all. The wind hadn't stopped, but it was no longer the wind of the sky. It seemed to blow up from the ground, from the open grave, from the wide, mud-covered eyes of a soul that had not yet been set free. Tuan collapsed to his knees, clutching the blood-soaked handkerchief in his hand. Every cell in his body felt it. This was no longer just a tale from the past. It was karma, and his blood now carried it. The old woman pulled a small ivory shard from her sleeve, carved with ancient symbols. Her hands trembling, she placed it on the grave. Ngọc Anh can't move on, because her heart was stolen, to feed the charm, and that heart isn't here. Tuan whispered hoarsely. Then, where is it? She looked at him, her eyes dark. No one knows for sure, but there is someone who once practiced alongside Mr. Tu. He lives deep in the forest, on Mount Cam, The villagers call him the blind sorcerer. Dusk had fallen when Tuan followed the old woman along the trail leading out of the village toward the mountain. The cold wind struck his face like whispers from the void. The path was rough, overgrown, cloaked in trees, not a single light in sight. The old woman wouldn't go further. She stopped at the base of the slope and said softly, "From here, you must go alone. He doesn't allow anyone else." Tuan continued. Every step felt like treading a thread suspended between life and death. Mount Cam had no birdsong, only the rustling of leaves, and a heavy scent in the air, like burning resin, mixed with blood. Deep in the woods, he found a small hut made of bamboo and dried leaves. In front of it hung a string of bones, and at the center, a cracked human skull, carved faintly with two words, "Karmic Sin." Before Tuan could call out, a voice emerged from the shadows. "If it's not the blood of the first, you may not enter, but yours, your blood has already spoken." A figure stepped forward, eyes covered by a black cloth, leaning on a staff, his body wrapped in a deep crimson robe, like dried blood aged with time. This was the blind sorcerer. Tuan told him everything. The man stood silent for a while, then spoke. "The charm's heart is not lost. It was kept for inheritance. Only bloodkin can unseal it, and it is already forming. If you don't stop it, it will become you or your child." A chill ran down Tuan's spine. To break the curse, you must bury the heart yourself. But the heart is still alive. The sorcerer led him into the hut. On a stone table sat a small brown ceramic jar, sealed with red thread and ancient talismans. He took Tuan's hand and made a shallow cut on his finger. Tuan's blood dripped onto the talisman. In that instant, the jar began to tremble, and the sound of a heartbeat echoed from within. Tuan staggered back. The stench rose to his throat. The sorcerer nodded. "That heart has lived off blood for 3 generations. Now, there is only one way. Your blood must make it stop." "Make it stop?" Tuan echoed, horrified. "You don't need to die. But you must face it. You must hold the karma, press it to your chest, until it stops beating." Tuan stared at the jar. It was small, but the heartbeat inside was strong. Real. "If it stops, will Ngọc-An's soul be free?" The sorcerer didn't answer. He simply said, "If the heart is not freed, this land will never rest." Tuan carried the jar back to the village under the cover of night. Rain began to fall again, drop by drop, like silent weeping. Once home, he placed the jar before Mr. Tu's altar and knelt. He took the ivory shard the old woman had used earlier and pierced his palm. His blood fell onto the jar. The heartbeat inside grew louder, stronger. Then, it stopped. A cold mist burst out. In the pitch-black room, a woman in red appeared behind Tuan, rested her hand on his shoulder. "I can go now. Thank you for keeping your promise." The figure vanished into the fog, and in the jar, the heart crumbled into dust. Since the night the heart in the jar crumbled to dust, the wind around Mr. Tu's land seemed to change direction. No longer howling, it became whispers, like voices murmuring behind the leaves. Tuan thought the curse had ended, but in truth, it had only just begun. His mother, a quiet woman who had lived in solitude at the foot of the village, suddenly fell ill. She vomited violently, her belly swelling unnaturally. Despite being over 60 and long past menopause, Tuan rushed her to the clinic, but the doctor could only shake his head. The ultrasound showed something strange. A growing mass inside her womb. No heartbeat, no fetus, just something alive. Panic-stricken, Tuan ran to the old woman by the banyan tree. As soon as she heard, her face drained of color. She clutched her string of bells so tightly her hands bled. The charm doesn't just feed on blood. It can be reborn. If the stolen heart was destroyed, it will borrow a body to take shape. Tuan stood frozen. "Borrow my mother's body?" The old woman looked into his eyes. The charm was once human, and now it wants to be human again. That night, Tuan returned to his mother's house. A storm raged outside, thunder rolling endlessly. From her room, he heard laughter, Not her voice, but a child's, high-pitched, clear, and it came from inside her belly. She lay unconscious, her stomach pulsing with small movements, as if a child inside was kicking, moving, rejoicing at rebirth. Tuan leaned in close. When he placed his hand on her belly, he clearly heard a voice, a little girl's whisper, "Daddy, this time, no one will bury me." He jerked back, stumbling into a table. His mother didn't wake, but on her belly, a 5-petaled flower mark had appeared, as if drawn in dried blood. The next day, he summoned the blind sorcerer from Mount Cam. As soon as the man stepped inside, he said, "It's taking form, no longer just a charm, but a body that talks, laughs, yet holds no soul. If it's born, it will grow fast. It will pretend to be human. But under every full moon, it will feed on what no human should, bones and blood of its own kin." Tuan stood in silence. "What must I do to stop it?" The sorcerer said nothing at first. Then he held out an object, an old copper hairpin. Engraved inside was the name Ngọc Anh. It was the last thing she had held before being buried alive. To prevent the charm from taking form, this must be returned to the source, to the one now carrying it. But only bloodkin can place it there. As if reburying a curse that never ended. Tuan choked up. It was his mother, the woman who knew nothing, who had given her life for him and their family. That night, the full moon rosé, winds howled from the forest. In the room, his mother lay unconscious, but her belly no longer just moved. It sang, "Hush now, I'm coming back, no one will bury me this time." Tuan burst into tears. He knelt beside her bed. In his hand was Ngọc Anh's hairpin, now warm, as if alive again. He pressed his forehead to her belly and whispered, "I'm sorry, mother, but I can't let the charm take your form. I can't let a lost soul be reborn through our own blood." His hand shaking, he placed the hairpin into a bowl of charm water the sorcerer had prepared. He lifted the bowl and dropped it, drip by drip, onto the flower-shaped mark on her belly. The room trembled. Wind surged through, though every door and window was closed. In that moment, a shadow burst from her stomach, flying toward the window. A girl, long-haired, barefoot, laughing, then vanishing into the moonlight. Tuan's mother opened her eyes. She cried, "Son, I dreamed I buried a little girl." Her hands were cold, but her eyes were so sad. Tuan held her close, silent. Outside, a lullaby still echoed, softly, as if unwilling to let go. The moonlight dimmed, and in the center of the yard, a hairpin lay glinting, wet with fresh blood, then vanished without a trace. 3 days after the full moon, Tuan still couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the eyes of the long-haired child, the form the charm had tried to take through his mother's womb. Even though it had disappeared into the moonlight, a strange presence still lingered around the house. Since that night, the mirrors inside began to fog, even though Tuan never touched them. But what truly terrified him was that every time he passed by a mirror, his face would appear unclear. The reflection showed the right body, the right hair, but the face was empty. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, cold skin, like wax. In panic, he smashed the mirror, but when he turned away, the image didn't disappear. It remained there, standing still, even after the glass was shattered. That evening, Tuan returned to his mother's house to check on her. Just as he stepped into the yard, he saw the shadow of a child run across the porch. He flashed his light, but there was nothing. Still, on the wet cement from the rain, small footprints appeared, fresh, wet, and cold, leading directly to his mother's room. Tuan pushed the door open. His mother was asleep, breathing steadily but pale as paper. Beside her bed was a broken comb, tangled with long strands of black hair that didn't belong to her. He picked it up, planning to take it, when suddenly, a small, cold hand gripped his from behind. He turned sharply. No one was there, but 5 small purple fingerprints were clearly pressed into his skin. Terrified, Tuan sought out the blind sorcerer once again. He found him deep in the forest, burning sacred herbs for a ritual. Tuan told him everything about the mirrors, the missing face, the child's laughter, and the invisible hand in the night. The sorcerer stayed silent for a long time before finally exhaling and speaking. The charm failed to take full form, but it hasn't left. It borrowed the face of the last person who opened the grave, and that was you. Tuan froze. You mean, it's taking my face? The sorcerer shook his head. Not taking, returning. You are the last blood Mr. Tu called upon. Knock-on's spirit has attached to you. Every time you look in a mirror, it tries to wear your face, to return. Tuan's throat tightened. How do I stop it? In response, the sorcerer brought out a small, ancient copper mirror, just the size of a palm. On the back, it was engraved with a blooming lotus flower. There is only one way. You must return her spirit to her true face. To do that, you need to reconstruct her image, using her hair, something she once owned, and her name spoken where she was buried. If she accepts her true face, the charm will no longer need a body. Tuan went home. He walked to the banyan tree where Knock-on's body had once been buried. He dug again. The ground was dry, as if no one had ever rested there. But deep beneath, a small patch of scalp remained, still attached to hair. He wrapped it in white cloth and returned to the old woman's house, where she kept Knock-on's belongings, a decayed red owl dye, several blurred photographs, and the same hairpin once used to break the charm. That night, beneath candlelight, Tuan laid everything on a wooden table: the hair, the red dress, the hairpin, and the copper mirror. He pricked his finger and let a drop of blood fall into the center. Knock-on, if you're still here, please accept your true face. I'm not Mr. Tu. I don't want to raise a charm. I just want to bring this to an end. Wind swirled through the room. The candle blew out. The scent of the charm's herbs thickened in the air. In the copper mirror, a girl's face slowly appeared, beautiful, delicate, and pure, but her eyes were filled with tears. She looked at Tuan and said softly, "This is the first time someone called my name to let me go, not to keep me trapped." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Thank you for giving me back my face, so I can leave as a person, not as a curse." Her reflection in the mirror faded. The wind died down. In the silence that followed, a lullaby rose one last time. "Hush now, sleep tight, mother's blood no longer clings to the world of the living." The next morning, as the first light of dawn passed through the window, Tuan looked into the bathroom mirror. His face had returned, whole, but his eyes were deeper, as if another soul had once looked out from within them. Outside, the wind brushed past the old banyan tree. On the wooden table, the copper mirror lay still, no longer reflecting anything at all. Since that night, Tuan's house had fallen into an eerie silence. The lullabies had stopped. The bells no longer chimed with the wind. The copper mirror was placed back inside the altar cabinet, covered with a red cloth, as if sealing away everything that had passed. His mother recovered, her eyes no longer heavy with sadness. But within Tuan, the weight remained. Something still felt unfinished. A part of the curse still clung to the land. One late autumn morning, beneath a crisp and dry sky, Tuan received a phone call from Mr. Tri, his grandfather's old friend. The man's voice crackled with age, urgent despite his weak cough. "Tuan, you need to go to your grandfather's grave. Someone has dug it up." Tuan rushed his motorbike toward the hilltop cemetery. Mr. Tu's resting place sat at the edge of the grounds, beside an old cluster of tram-bough trees. When Tuan arrived, his heart nearly stopped. The grave had been partially unearthed, the soil turned up and scattered, and the cement slab had been pried open at one corner. It wasn't grave robbing, it wasn't vandalism, it looked like something had crawled out from underneath. At the bottom of the grave was emptiness. No coffin, no remains, just a long claw mark carved along the wall of the soil. Dragging toward the forest behind, Tuan stood frozen, haunted by the last words Knock-on had spoken from the mirror. "Thank you for returning my face, so I could leave as a person." But what about Mr. Tu, the one who started it all? His death had never truly been confirmed. All they had was a faded photo, a memorial tablet, and a whispered rumor that he had vanished from this world by the very thing he once created. Tuan began following the claw mark into the forest behind the cemetery. The path was rarely traveled, but the earth showed clear signs of something being dragged. Beneath moss-covered roots, silver strands of old hair were tangled in the dirt. Reaching a bend in the woods, he found a small rock hollow, hidden behind dry branches. As he pulled them aside, a sharp, earthy stench hit his face, not the smell of death, but the scent of fully ripe charms. Inside the hollow sat a figure made of straw, shaped like a man and packed with soil. It was positioned cross-legged, facing the entrance. On its forehead was a tiny piece of paper, stained in blood. Written on it were just 4 words: "No one has replaced me." Tuan trembled. The handwriting, he recognized it. It was Mr. Tu's, the same writing found in the old notebook. That night, Tuan returned to the village. The sky was foggy, the wind whistling through the roof tiles like fabric tearing. He sat at the altar of Mr. Tu and lit 3 sticks of incense. As he prayed, he spoke aloud, "If you're still here, please let me know. Did you choose to leave, or never leave at all?" At that moment, the candle flame abruptly went out. There was no wind. The room plunged into darkness. In that silence, Tuan heard 3 knocks on the ground. Slow, steady, then a deep, gravelly voice whispered behind him, "The charm chooses no one. People step into it themselves." Tuan didn't dare turn around. He simply closed his eyes. "Ngọc Anh has passed on. So what are you waiting for?" The voice came again. "I wait for the one who will replace me. If no one steps forward, I will return, not in my own flesh, but through anyone who carries this blood." The next morning, Tuan went to his mother's house. She was gardening, looking vibrant and strong, as if none of the nightmare had ever happened. But when she turned to call him in for breakfast, Tuan froze. On her wrist was an old silver charm bracelet, the exact kind Mr. Tu used to wear whenever he summoned the charm. "Where did you get that?" he asked. She blinked. "It was in my pillow this morning. I thought you left it for me." Tuan didn't answer. He took a step back. In the golden morning light shining across the porch, his mother's shadow stretched behind her. But it wasn't hers. It was taller, thinner, and the hair was tied low, like an old man's. The silver bells began to chime, softly, steadily, like a spirit being called home through the morning mist. Tuan sat motionless for a long time after seeing the silver charm bracelet on his mother's wrist and the strange shadow that stretched behind her. In the faint light of early morning, that shadow didn't shift with her movements like a normal person's would. It stood still, as if it had a mind of its own, and the shape of that shadow, Tuan recognized it too well. It was the shadow of Mr. Tu. But he was dead, or at least, everyone believed he was. Silently, Tuan took the silver bracelet. The moment he touched it, a coldness shot from his fingertips straight to his brain, and in that instant, he heard Mr. Tu's voice, not through his ears, but inside his head. "If the blood never ends, the charm never stops. If no one chooses to take it, the living must share." Tuan flinched and dropped the bracelet to the floor. The bells chimed once, just once, but the sound lingered, echoing as if from deep underground. That night, Tuan didn't sleep. He sat beside Mr. Tu's altar, his hand resting on the old notebook. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced along the wall. The face in Mr. Tu's portrait stared down, stern eyes, firm jaw, but Tuan knew that wasn't truly him anymore. Around midnight, the wind picked up. Tuan heard dragging footsteps along the wooden hallway. Slow, heavy, not walking, sliding, as if something without legs was crawling. He held his breath and peeked through the door crack. Nothing, but then, 3 knocks came, soft, steady, against the wooden wall behind the altar. Tuan stood up and opened the door. No one, but on the dirt floor, there was a handprint, deep, wide open, like a hand reaching for someone to replace it. He walked to the old storage room where his grandfather's belongings were kept. After rummaging for a while, he found an unsent letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but each word was heavy with despair. "I know. I should never have passed down the curse. But the blood has soaked the soil. Every night, I hear its voice. It doesn't call me, Father. not grandfather. It calls me, the one to replace. If you're reading this letter, you're standing where I once stood. And behind you is me. Tuan turned sharply. No one there. But the mirror in the room had begun to fog, and then, it no longer reflected him. Instead, a figure appeared, faceless, skinless, a black, human-shaped shadow. Around its neck, the same silver charm bracelet. The next morning, Tuan made a decision no one had ever made before. He opened the urn containing Mr. Tu's ashes. The incense bowl was ice cold. The urn was heavier than it should have been. When he poured out part of the contents, he didn't find only ashes, there was a lock of long, gray hair mixed with a piece of shriveled human skin, etched with one word, replace. Tuan trembled. Mr. Tu hadn't just hidden his death. He'd hidden a piece of himself, to keep the curse from choosing someone else. But now, because Tuan had reopened everything, opened the box, read the journal, called the name of the dead, karma no longer waited. That evening, the old woman from the banyan tree came to the house. She didn't come inside, she stood at the gate and said just one sentence. If you don't want your mother to take his place, there's only one way left. Tuan ran out. What way? The old woman pulled a small bone from her sleeve, wrapped in a red cloth. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The charm won't take someone, if someone willingly offers. There must be blood, there must be soul. You must sit where you once sat. You must let the charm choose again. But this time, it chooses the soul, not the body. Tuan clutched the bone tightly. He understood now. If not him, then it would be his mother. Or a child. Or anyone with the same bloodline. At dawn, he walked alone to the banyan tree. He placed the bone at the center of the old stone ring. He tied the silver bells back onto the branch. Then he removed his shirt and sat down in the exact spot where Mr. Tu once drew the circle to summon the charm. He closed his eyes and waited. The wind rose. The bells began to chime. From the ground, a quiet laugh echoed, childlike, but raspy. Then, a voice called out, "Daddy, I'm here now." Tuan opened his eyes. Standing in front of him was a little girl, faceless. Around her neck, the silver charm bracelet. In her hand, a piece of skin etched with the word, replace. The bells clinked softly in the wind. The child's laughter mixed with the sound of breath, deep and heavy, like the earth itself, beginning to open. The wind howled from the forest in sharp bursts, carrying with it the musty scent of freshly turned soil from the old grave. Tuan still sat there, in the center of the ancient stone ring beneath the banyan tree, the same place his grandfather once practiced the dark art of raising charms. This was where blood and lost souls had tangled together over the years to form a curse that refused to die. In front of him, the faceless child remained motionless, the silver charm bracelet swinging gently with the earth's breath. The voice calling, "Daddy," still echoed. But this time, it wasn't haunting, it was heartbreakingly sad. Tuan looked at the child. Though it had no eyes, no mouth, its entire body trembled, shaking with rage, or sorrow, or both. He gripped the brittle bone in his hand, the very bone cut from Ngọc An's body when she had been buried alive for the ritual. He sliced a deep line across his palm and let his blood drip into the circle. "I'm sorry, I wasn't the one who made you. But if you need a soul to stop this, then let me be the last one to carry the mark of the charm." Tuan's blood soaked into the soil. The child let out a scream, soundless. But the wind screamed in its place. The banyan tree groaned. Its dry branches began to curl inward as if embracing the stone circle. The bells clashed wildly. From the ground, dozens of tiny hands emerged, gripping the circle tightly, as if all the buried souls were watching, witnessing the end. From a distance, the blind sorcerer appeared, his crimson robe whipping in the wind. He did not step into the circle. He stood outside, chanting in an ancient tongue long forgotten. His voice echoed like a cry from the spirit world. "The final blood has been spilled. The final debt has been paid. The gate of blood shall close." The faceless child stepped forward, placing its small hand over the bleeding wound on Tuan's palm. The bleeding stopped, but the skin did not heal. Instead, a glowing mark appeared, shaped like a flame. red as ember. The child sat down. For the first time, a face began to form. It wasn't Tuan's. It wasn't Knock-On's. It was a completely new face, calm, peaceful. The girl looked up and asked softly, "Does this mean I get to be human?" Tuan nodded. The wind ceased. The forest fell still. The moonlight broke free of the clouds. The girl bowed deeply, then slowly dissolved into the earth, leaving behind a single red lotus bud, sprouting from the exact spot where Tuan had let his blood fall. The blind sorcerer stepped into the circle at last and spoke quietly. "The circle has closed, but you must live and keep the promise. No one must disturb this land again. If anyone ever digs it up, the blood will call back." 3 months later, Tuan began clearing out Mr. Tu's old house. He didn't demolish it. He didn't build anything new. He simply locked it. Every object tied to the charm, the talismans, the mirror, the box, he buried them deep beneath the banyan tree, burned the remains, drove stakes into the ground, and raised a stone marker. On that stone, he carved a single line. "Here lies the buried curse. Please do not awaken it." Years passed. Tuan opened a small school for poor children in the village. His new house was built near the old plot of land. Among the students was a special little girl, long-haired, clear-eyed, with a voice as soft as the breeze. She didn't remember where she came from, had no known relatives, but often sat beneath the banyan tree behind the house, touching the soil and whispering something to the wind. One day, Tuan asked, "What are you telling the tree?" She smiled and shook her head. "I'm just reminding it that this time, I get to live." Tuan turned away, silent, and in his chest, something warm stirred. Not blood, but peace. Blood had once spilled, spirits had once cried, but when someone dares to stop the cycle, then even the land will no longer thirst. We've just walked the end of a long journey, of blood, of souls, of those forgotten beneath the earth. Some things, once unearthed, no longer belong to the past, but rise as echoes of karma, waiting for someone to carry it. But just like Tuan, if there's someone brave enough to face it, with enough heart to make amends for the sins of those before them, even vengeful spirits can find release. And the charm can finally close its circle of blood. If this story touched a part of your memory, your emotions, or your belief deep within, please share your thoughts below in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you won't miss the next story, hidden in the shadows. See you at the next door that opens. This is Shadows in the Night, where light is the last thing left behind.